Did you know that 65% of people remember stories better than facts alone? It's true. Our brains are wired to respond to stories, which means that mastering emotional storytelling can make your message stick. But here's the kicker. Many storytellers make mistakes that can turn powerful tales into forgettable ones. In this video, we're diving into the world of emotional storytelling to uncover the common errors that could be ruining your stories. We'll explore why overloading your audience with emotions can backfire, how authenticity can turn into oversharing, and why manufactured drama might be killing your narrative's impact. Stick around as we break down these pitfalls and give you practical tips to avoid them. By the end, you'll know how to keep your audience engaged, emotionally connected, and coming back for more. Ready to transform your storytelling? Let's get started. Chapter 1. Overloaded emotions. Why less is more. Let's kick off by addressing a common mistake: emotional overload. When you're telling a story, it's easy to think that more emotion equals more impact. But here's the catch: it doesn't. Research from the University of California suggests that stories with too many emotional highs and lows can overwhelm the audience, causing them to disengage. Think of emotions like spices in cooking. A little goes a long way. Take the movie Inside Out, for example. The creators carefully balanced joy, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust without letting any one emotion take over. This balance is what made the story so relatable and powerful. When you pile on too many emotions at once, it's like dumping an entire spice rack into your dish. The flavors get lost, and so does your audience. One strategy to avoid emotional overload is to focus on one or two key emotions. For instance, if your story is about overcoming adversity, center it around determination and hope. Let these emotions build gradually. It's this gradual build that creates a memorable story, one that sticks with your audience long after the final word. Another tip: use silence and pauses to your advantage. According to a study by the University of Glasgow, well-timed pauses allow your audience to process emotions more deeply. Instead of rushing from one emotional beat to the next, give your audience time to feel what you want them to feel. Remember, less is often more when it comes to evoking emotion in storytelling. Chapter 2. The Sincerity Trap. Authenticity without oversharing. Authenticity is the cornerstone of great storytelling, but there's a fine line between being genuine and oversharing. We've all heard that being real with your audience is important, but there's a trap here. If you overshare, you risk making the story about you, not your audience, and that's a problem. Consider Brené Brown, a researcher known for her work on vulnerability. She emphasizes that while vulnerability is key to connection, it must be shared thoughtfully. Vulnerability without boundaries, she says, is not vulnerability, it's oversharing. This is where many storytellers go wrong. They confuse raw honesty with dumping every detail on their audience. A good strategy here is to filter your story through the lens of your audience. Ask yourself, will this detail help them, or is it just about me? If it's the latter, it's probably best to leave it out. Instead, focus on the parts of your story that will resonate with your audience's experiences. This doesn't mean you should hide your true self, just that you should share selectively with purpose. Another point to consider is the role of mystery. Leaving some things unsaid can actually make your story more engaging. A study by the University of California, Berkeley found that stories with some ambiguity are often more intriguing to audiences. So, embrace the art of leaving a little to the imagination. Your story will be stronger, and your audience will be more invested. Chapter 3. Disconnected narratives, keeping the emotional thread intact. One of the biggest challenges in storytelling is keeping the emotional thread intact. It's easy to let your narrative jump from one event to another, but this can lead to emotional disconnection. Your audience needs a continuous emotional journey, not a series of disjointed moments. Think of your story as a woven tapestry. Every thread should contribute to the overall pattern. If one thread is out of place, the whole design suffers. The same goes for your story's emotional arc. A study by the Harvard Business Review found that stories with a clear, consistent emotional thread are 22% more likely to be remembered by audiences. To keep your narrative emotionally connected, start by mapping out your story's emotional highs and lows. Identify the key emotions you want to evoke and make sure they flow logically from one to the next. For example, if your story begins with a challenge, let the emotion build from frustration to determination and finally to triumph. Each step should feel natural, leading your audience deeper into the story. Another useful technique is to use callbacks, repeating a key phrase, image, or emotion from earlier in the story. This helps to tie your narrative together and reinforces the emotional thread. Think of it like a chorus in a song. It brings your story full circle and leaves a lasting impact. Chapter 4, False Highs and Lows, the Danger of Manufactured Drama. Manufactured drama is a storytelling pitfall that's all too common. When you artificially inflate emotional moments, your audience can sense it and it breaks the connection. Authenticity, as we've discussed, is key, but so is the natural flow of emotion. In storytelling, it's tempting to create big, dramatic moments to keep your audience engaged. But if those moments don't feel earned, they'll fall flat. According to a survey by the Journal of Media Psychology, audiences are 30% more likely to disconnect from a story when they feel manipulated by false highs and lows. Instead of forcing drama, focus on building tension naturally. Let your story's conflict and resolution develop organically. A good example is J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. The emotional stakes rise with each book, but they never feel forced. The drama grows from the characters' experiences and decisions, making it feel real and impactful. One strategy is to anchor your drama in relatable experiences. People connect with stories that reflect their own lives. If your drama comes from real human emotions like fear, love, or loss, it will resonate more deeply. Also, avoid the trap of too many twists and turns. While a plot twist can be exciting, too many can make your story feel contrived. Remember, your goal is to engage your audience, not to shock them into paying attention. When your story's highs and lows feel genuine, your audience will stay emotionally connected throughout. Before moving on to the next chapter, take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got more great tips coming up, and you won't want to miss them. Chapter 5, The Sympathetic Sinkhole, Avoiding the Pity Pitfall. Let's talk about the pity pitfall. It's easy to think that evoking sympathy will automatically engage your audience, but there's a fine line between drawing empathy and pulling them into a sympathy sinkhole. If your story leans too heavily on asking for pity, you risk losing the depth and connection that makes storytelling powerful. For example, in her book, The Art of Memoir, Mary Carr warns against making your story a misery memoir. She says, self-pity is an emotion that curdles quickly in the reader's stomach. Instead, focus on resilience and growth, which are far more compelling. People want to root for someone who overcomes challenges, not someone who dwells in them. A strategy to avoid this trap is to balance your story with moments of strength and agency. Show how you or your characters faced adversity but didn't let it define the entire narrative. According to a study by Stanford University, stories that highlight personal growth rather than just suffering are more likely to inspire and motivate audiences. Also, be mindful of the language you use. Words like unfair or tragic can easily tip your story into the pity zone. Instead, frame your challenges as obstacles that were faced head-on. This shift in perspective not only makes your story more engaging, but also more relatable. Everyone faces difficulties, but it's the way we respond to them that truly resonates. Chapter 6, Misplaced Melancholy, When Sadness Overshadows Your Story. Sadness is a powerful emotion, but it's easy for it to take over a story if not carefully managed. When your narrative becomes too heavy with melancholy, it can overshadow the other emotions you want to convey. The key is to use sadness strategically as a contrast rather than a constant. Consider the movie Up by Pixar. The opening sequence is incredibly sad, but it's not the whole story. That sadness sets the stage for the adventure that follows, making the joy and excitement feel even more vibrant. According to research from the University of Wisconsin, stories that mix emotions, like pairing sadness with hope, are more likely to be remembered positively by audiences. A good strategy is to let sadness serve a purpose in your story rather than letting it dominate. Use it to highlight the stakes or to deepen a character's journey, but always balance it with moments of light. This contrast keeps your audience engaged and prevents your story from becoming too heavy. Another tactic is to follow sadness with a resolution or a moment of relief. This not only helps to lighten the emotional load, but also makes the resolution feel more earned. When you allow your audience to experience the full range of emotions, your story becomes more dynamic and memorable. Chapter 7. Flatlining. The risk of an emotionally monotonous story. One of the biggest mistakes you can make in storytelling is maintaining a single emotional tone throughout. This is what we call flatlining, and it's a surefire way to lose your audience's interest. Just as a monotone voice can put listeners to sleep, a story that doesn't vary its emotional tone can feel lifeless and dull. A study by the Journal of Consumer Research found that stories with emotional variety, where the audience experiences ups and downs, are rated 20% higher in engagement than those with a single emotional tone. This shows just how crucial it is to mix things up. A strategy to avoid flatlining is to map out your emotional beats before you start telling your story. Identify where you want to evoke excitement, tension, relief, or joy. Then make sure there's a natural flow between these emotions. Think of it like a roller coaster. The highs and lows are what make the ride thrilling. Another tip is to use contrast to your advantage. For instance, a light-hearted moment following a tense scene can be incredibly effective. It not only gives your audience a breather, but also makes the emotional highs stand out more. The key is to keep your audience on their toes so they never know what's coming next. Chapter 8. The forced connection. How over-explaining kills the magic. Finally, let's talk about the danger of over-explaining. When you lay everything out too clearly, you leave no room for your audience's imagination. This can kill the magic of your story. Remember, storytelling is a two-way street. Your audience wants to be part of the experience, to fill in the gaps and make their own connections. A quote from Ernest Hemingway's "The Old Man and the Sea" sums this up perfectly. If a writer of prose knows enough of what he is writing about, he may omit things that he knows, and the reader will have a feeling of those things as strongly as though the writer had stated them. This is known as the iceberg theory, where the deeper meaning is beneath the surface. A strategy here is to trust your audience. You don't need to explain every detail. Let them read between the lines. For example, if your story involves a character's struggle with guilt, you don't need to spell it out. Show it through their actions and let your audience infer the rest. Another effective technique is to use symbolism or metaphors. These tools allow you to convey complex emotions and ideas without heavy-handed explanations. It's like giving your audience a puzzle to solve, which can be far more engaging than simply telling them the answer. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed these tips. There's plenty more to explore, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.